Wealth is often imagined as freedom, yet those who acquire it discover a quieter, harsher reality, where choices are sharper and losses feel heavier than imagine. The path to money is rarely linear. It carves through relationships, identity, and daily life in ways that are invisible until consequences accumulate. Many assume wealth brings ease, yet each gain comes with subtle costs, emotional compromises, and decisions that slowly reshape the mind. Ambition, desire, and opportunity converge, but rarely without friction. The friction of trade-offs that feel personal, uncomfortable, and sometimes isolating. Observers envy success, imagining a life free of constraint, yet the wealthy navigate rules and pressures unseen, often internalized and unspoken. There is an unacknowledged discipline in accumulation, not only of capital but of attention, energy, and emotional investment. Every step forward exposes vulnerabilities, and those who succeed quietly learn which risks are tolerable and which leave permanent scars. The journey can change a person almost imperceptibly. Habits solidify, priorities shift, and what once mattered may now feel trivial or inefficient. Wealth does not only attract opportunity, it magnifies judgment, social scrutiny, and the cost of mistakes beyond ordinary comprehension. To understand the uncomfortable truth of becoming wealthy, one must observe not only triumphs but the quiet, almost invisible erosion that occurs along the way. Becoming wealthy rewires perception, emotion, and decision-making, because the stakes are larger, the risks irreversible, and each choice echoes through multiple domains of life. Behavioral psychology shows that repeated exposure to high-consequence decisions suppresses impulsive emotional responses, replacing them with calculation and delayed reactions. Over time, immediate gratification loses weight, and strategic patience becomes more valuable than emotional satisfaction. The mind learns to view resources as instruments, rather than sources of comfort, and emotional expression as a potential liability rather than benefit. Decision fatigue becomes a hidden threat, and emotional neutrality functions as energy conservation and risk management simultaneously. Repetition and exposure teach the brain to anticipate failure, betrayal, and disappointment, recalibrating expectation and emotional engagement. Wealth requires constant attention to subtle signals, social positioning, and reputational risk, demanding detachment from distractions that once guided ordinary reactions. Cognitive frameworks shift, prioritizing predictive modeling over feeling, probability over instinct, and structure over spontaneity. Emotions are not absent, but regulated, compartmentalized, and often delayed until they can be processed safely. Away from strategic arenas, the wealthy learn to observe without reacting immediately, to evaluate context before committing energy or sentiment. This mental economy extends to relationships, where attachment and trust are weighed carefully against potential vulnerability. Every interaction becomes a micro-decision, each expression monitored for consequence and interpreted within the wider network of influence. Even success carries hidden emotional cost, as triumphs amplify expectation, scrutiny, and responsibility rather than deliver uncomplicated satisfaction. Behavioral reinforcement teaches that calmness signals competence, composure ensures access, and visible emotion may invite exploitation. The process of accumulation becomes a practice in emotional and cognitive filtration, separating what matters from what does not. Time perception adjusts, long-term consequences outweigh present impulses, and patience becomes both a strategy and a survival mechanism. Failures are internalized quietly, lessons abstracted, and emotion reserved for private reflection rather than public reaction. This shift explains the apparent attachment, which is not a lack of feeling, but an optimized emotional response to high-stakes. Control over variables, resources, and outcomes reshapes the nervous system, fostering resilience but also isolation from ordinary human rhythms. Ultimately, wealth rewires not only what is possible, but also what is felt, and the mind becomes trained to endure discomfort without spectacle. In boardrooms, wealthy individuals often listen more than they speak, their silence misunderstood as indecision, while in reality every word is weighed against long-term consequence. At social events, others rush to impress or express, yet the wealthy observe patterns, calibrating responses to preserve influence and avoid unnecessary exposure. When facing financial setbacks, reactions are rarely visible, losses are processed internally, plans recalibrated, and public composure maintained to protect strategic advantage. Employees notice a lack of emotional venting, assuming detachment, while the wealthy quietly absorb stress as data, converting experience into future decision making. In negotiations, subtle patience dominates, offers are delayed, reactions controlled, and apparent calm conceals intense calculation and risk assessment. Family dynamics reveal similar patterns. Emotional drama is minimized. Conversations focus on problem solving rather than spontaneous expression or indulgence. Children of the wealthy often describe homes that feel structured and stable, yet emotionally contained, predictable yet lacking impulsive warmth. Friends may interpret distant behavior as aloofness, Yet the wealthy often measure engagement carefully, avoiding overcommitment or dependency in relationships. Romantic partnerships mirror this pattern. Attachment is strategic, overt vulnerability is limited, and emotional exchange is filtered for mutual understanding. Even leisure is optimized. Time off is scheduled, recovery is purposeful, and indulgence is measured rather than spontaneous or excessive. In public scrutiny, wealthy individuals maintain neutral expressions, revealing little under intense observation, signaling composure and strategic control. Conflict is rarely escalated openly. Disputes are addressed calmly, often through private channels, preserving influence and minimizing collateral damage. Trust is selective, empathy is measured, and social investments are calculated to maximize loyalty while reducing potential risk. In crisis management, emotional restraint ensures decisions remain deliberate, prioritizing outcomes over personal sentiment or public approval. Daily routines often reflect efficiency rather than pleasure. From diet to travel, time becomes a resource to optimize rather than enjoy. Investment decisions illustrate this detachment. Losses and gains treated analytically, emotional spikes minimized to maintain clarity, and long-term strategy. Networking behavior is deliberate, social reciprocity monitored, and outward charm often masks internal calculation. Even philanthropic endeavors are approached strategically, with social perception and long-term impact factored into every gesture. Through these behaviors, detachment is evident, yet it functions as adaptation rather than deficiency, a pattern honed by repeated consequence. The appearance of calm often misleads observers into moral or emotional judgments, masking the disciplined reasoning beneath. Underlying emotional detachment is repeated exposure to irreversible decisions. Where impulsive feeling once carried permanent cost and vulnerability, the nervous system adapts, threat response diminishes, and calm becomes a default strategy to preserve optionality and focus. Temporal perception shifts, urgent impulses lose relevance, and delayed processing allows emotion to fade before influencing action. Attribution changes. Outcomes are often assigned to systems or structures, rather than personal responsibility, lightening emotional burden. Power dynamics reinforce restraint. Visible feeling invites challenge, manipulation, or misinterpretation. Neutral expression signals dominance and control. Cognitive reinforcement strengthens. Calmness rewarded with access. Composure preserves advantage, while emotional expression risks exploitation. Social environments normalize detachment. Peer behavior models emotional restraint. New entrants adapt or are excluded. Accumulated grief and repeated betrayal create subtle emotional scar tissue, teaching the brain to buffer against recurring disappointment. Selective empathy emerges, focusing on abstract outcomes, systemic impact, or long-term consequences rather than immediate human resonance. Emotion becomes compartmentalized, accessed privately, processed quietly, and rarely displayed in arenas where leverage is at stake. Repetition rewires neural pathways, regulatory circuits strengthen, and calmness transitions from effortful to default state. Identity fuses with detachment, becoming both strategy and self-conception. Emotional restraint internalized as personal norm. Breaking the pattern feels risky. Exposure threatens carefully maintained equilibrium. Even in personal spaces, observation becomes a tool, assessing signals, behaviors, and potential threats, while maintaining controlled presence in every interaction. Loss of spontaneity accompanies adaptation. Emotional immediacy traded for long-term stability and clarity. Every social, financial, and personal choice is filtered through predictive modeling, reducing emotional vulnerability at cost of ordinary intimacy. Detachment is a survival mechanism, optimized for complex systems, high stakes, and public scrutiny. Internal tension persists. Unexpressed emotion accumulates, creating a quiet but persistent undercurrent beneath composed behavior. Observers misinterpret this calm as superiority, apathy, or emptiness, missing the nuanced mechanism shaping restraint. Ultimately, what appears as emotional detachment is a learned adaptation to risk, consequence, and the constant demand for control. If you confirm, I will continue with Layer 5 subtle subscribe moment, Layer 6 dark truths and misconceptions, and Layer 7 quiet reflective ending. Do you want me to proceed? For those who notice these patterns quietly unfolding in their own observations, following PsyWealthy allows continued exploration of human behavior beneath the surface of wealth, power, and status. There is no urgency in this invitation, only the option to return whenever curiosity calls, to examine the subtle mechanisms shaping ambition, decision-making, and emotional architecture. Many believe wealth brings happiness instantly, yet the truth is far more complex. Emotional tension persists even as material needs are met, quietly shaping behavior. Another common misconception assumes the wealthy live free of consequence, ignoring the heightened stakes, amplified scrutiny, and subtle social pressure they constantly navigate. Observers often mistake detachment for confidence or moral superiority, Overlooking the internal calculation and restraint that produce composed exterior behavior, some imagine wealth erases fear, yet it relocates it into abstract threats, reputational risk, and potential systemic collapse rather than eliminating it entirely. There is a belief that money solves interpersonal tension, when in reality relationships often require more careful management and strategic engagement than before. Many assume accumulation of wealth is effortless or glamorous, failing to see the repeated trade-offs, sacrifice, and emotional discipline involved. Another myth is that emotional control indicates lack of empathy, when selective and compartmentalized empathy is often deployed towards systemic or long-term outcomes. Observers romanticize neutral composure, imagining it enviable, while ignoring the subtle loneliness and isolation that accompany sustained emotional restraint. Some think success removes internal conflict, yet tension often continues quietly, experienced internally rather than expressed outwardly. There is a belief that wealth simplifies life, yet each gain magnifies complexity, responsibility, and the consequences of mistakes. Many assume the wealthy can indulge freely without consequence, while, in truth, indulgence carries social, financial, and emotional cost. Some interpret calmness as natural talent, rather than a learned adaptation to repeated exposure to high-stakes environments. Another misconception is that the wealthy experience freedom, neglecting that every decision is constrained by stakes, expectations, and long-term impact. Observers often assume detachment is enviable, overlooking what it silently costs in intimacy, spontaneity, and ordinary human connection. Ultimately, the uncomfortable truth is that wealth changes not only opportunity, but the architecture of emotion, social perception, and internal life itself. The journey toward wealth reshapes the mind slowly, teaching patience, calculation, and emotional economy that outsiders often misinterpret. What appears as calm detachment often conceals internal complexity, weighing consequences, assessing risk, and managing tension that never fully disappears. Silence becomes strategy, observation becomes routine, and emotional responses are filtered through a lens of survival and long-term advantage. The path to financial accumulation often isolates, replacing immediate human resonance with delayed and measured engagement. Even pleasure is recalibrated, indulgence optimized, and satisfaction abstracted, creating a life governed by consequence rather than impulse. Relationships become strategic, empathy measured, and social trust filtered through experience and observation rather than spontaneity. Success comes at subtle cost, as emotional immediacy is traded for stability, control, and calculated endurance. Observers misread calm as superiority, but it is a mechanism of preservation, quietly honed by repeated exposure to high stakes. Understanding these patterns does not demand admiration, only careful observation of the subtle transformations wealth imposes on mind and behavior. The ultimate truth lingers quietly. Money alters not only opportunity, but the internal architecture of thought, emotion, and connection, teaching resilience and restraint in equal measure.